Godric's Hollow held its breath that autumn, as if the village itself feared to make a sound around the Dumbledore house. The shutters were shut against the wind, the curtains were shut against the eyes. I kept the lights low and my steps quiet, as though grief would wake if I moved too quickly. Ariana's room was as she left it. Gellert did not write. He had been brilliance and blaze, and then he was gone, taking with him the future we planned like boys drawing empires in dust. In the silence he left, I learned how many sounds a house could make, the tick, the sigh, the 3 boards in the hall that complained no matter how I stepped. On the 3rd night after the funeral, my desk was a battlefield of parchment. I sorted, I burned, pretending order could stand in for absolution. A sealed envelope lay half buried beneath lecture notes. My name was on it in a hand that made my heart misstep. The loops, the pressure on the downstrokes, the slight leftward lean. It was my handwriting. It was not any letter I remembered writing. Across the front, impossible and neat, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Beneath, in smaller script, a date that would not occur for 4 decades. I laughed, too loudly, and then I stopped, because the ink smelled faintly of mint and smoke, the way my ink always did when I rushed. I broke the seal. The wax crumbled like old snow. Inside, a single page, thick and creased, as if it had traveled a long way without moving at all. My eyes found the first line before I had decided to read. Do not trust Gellert on the night of the eclipse. The floor tilted. Some sentences peel the world away until only breath remains. I read it again. The next line struck harder. This is not a prank. It is not a dark trick. It is you, Albus. It is me, writing to us. I have learned things I would give my wand hand to unlearn. Listen, and perhaps you will not have to carry them. Proof lay everywhere, the precise Latin of my private spells, a note about the burn on my left thumb from a miscast heating charm at 17, the lilacs Ariana liked, which I had not told a soul. The voice on the page felt like a hand on my shoulder, warm, insistent, familiar. There will be an eclipse in late October. He will ask for a vow beneath the shadow. He will say it is to prove love. It is to prove dominion. Refuse him? If you do not, we will build a world on a hinge so thin the first wind will cut it in 2. I sat. The chair creaked like a confession. I wanted to throw the letter into the fire. I wanted to fold it into the smallest possible shape and hide it inside my sleeve. I wanted, disastrously, to answer it. A floorboard spoke in the hall. For one instant I thought the future had knocked. It was only the house settling, and my own pulse asking to be believed. I read on. There is a path where we are kings for a season and monsters forever after. There is a path where we end things before they begin. Neither is mercy. Choose the one that leaves a world for her to sleep in. Her? Ariana? The ink blurred. I shut my eyes and tasted salt. When I opened them, the page had one more line, angled as if written with a shaking hand. Forgive me for loving him, and forgive yourself for loving him more. I folded the letter back into its skin. Night pressed its face to the glass. I lit the lamp and watched the flame gather itself, bright and stubborn. A future self had crossed a lifetime to reach me. It should have been absurd. Instead, it felt like the only honest thing in the room. I paced. Gellert would write, I told myself. He would come. He always came when there was a new idea to set alight, a boundary to cross and name as freedom. The eclipse, yes, he had mentioned it, laughing at the poetry of swearing while the sky itself grew dark. At the window, the village slept like a charm. Smoke thinned above the roofs. Somewhere, a dog questioned the moon. I pressed my forefinger to the pane and traced a circle, the trick mother taught to keep frost from knitting there by morning. The glass cooled my skin, the ring stayed clear. I breathed through it and watched the little halo cloud and clear. Refuse him, the letter had said. Yet the memory of Gellert's voice braided itself through the word like gold through straw. He would smile as he said, only if you wish it, Albus, and make refusal feel like a smaller courage than surrender. I slid the letter beneath the false bottom of my desk drawer, where I hid the few things I dared not burn. The secret sat there like a second heart. I closed the study door and leaned my forehead against the wood until the house settled again around me. The sky was already practicing for the eclipse, or so I told myself. Shadows seemed longer. The moon seemed nearer. And somewhere far away, too close to bear, a boy with a wand and a wicked grin might already be drafting his invitation to the night he promised would change everything. The house listened, and so did I. Autumn learned my habits and began to imitate them. I woke before dawn, lit the blue flame under the kettle, and read the letter by lamplight until the words lived in my mouth. By afternoon I could recite each line like a charm. I did not mean to. It is a strange devotion, memorizing a warning against devotion. The first proof came small as a pinprick. The letter said there would be lilacs on Ariana's grave though none grew in Godric's hollow. I visited at noon to spike the prophecy and found a single spray laid neatly on the stone, dew bright on its edges. A Muggle girl hurried away with an empty basket. A wizard with pale hair had paid her to gather them by dawn. She feared to stay. So did I. In the afternoon, the square clock chimed 13. Villagers paused, blinked, and carried on, each certain the error belonged to someone else. By evening I admitted what I knew at first: scent of mint and smoke ink, the future had intruded, and I let it in. I tested the parchment like any dangerous artifact. A drop of Revelio, no foreign hand, cold iron, no glamour. I tried to write back, the page refused every mark I made, as though it had already decided how much the past was allowed to speak. Footsteps rang on the path outside. Gellert arrived like a spell you half expected. The door swung before I reached it. He stood framed by October, hair like gold, cloak storm dark, eyes alight with secrets. Albus, he said. Before I could school my voice, he was already in the study, touching the books he loved to provoke and the lenses he loved. He turned one, light ringed the ceiling. I have a plan, he said, and every nerve remembered the line about the late October eclipse. The moon will darken next week. Imagine it, a vow made when even the heavens look away. No witness more impartial than night itself. A vow, I repeated. To what end? To our end, he said. To what we began and were foolish enough to pause. A promise that neither of us will permit the smallness of the present to delay the greatness we owe the world. You ask for poetry while the ink is still wet on the worst thing we have ever written. Precisely when poetry is required, he said. Swear with me and we make a future that redeems it. I felt the desk like a tide at my back. Beneath its false bottom, the letter waited like a second conscience. I imagined pressing it into his hand. Look, a map from a man I have not yet become. Instead I poured tea. You speak as though we have no choice but to crown ourselves. Choice? He laughed. Choice is an instrument. He leaned nearer. Come to the ridge beyond the churchyard at moonrise on the night of the eclipse. Bring nothing you cannot swear to lose. He set his gloved hand on the desk. There was a small tear at the seam between thumb and palm. The letter had mentioned it, along with a scar on his wrist I would touch in a future I did not yet own. The tear was there. I looked away before wonder betrayed me. Will you come? He asked, no arrogance now, only that terrible hope he wore when he was most dangerous. I will consider it. Consider quickly, he said. After the door closed, the house exhaled. The letter in its hiding place warmed my memory like a coal. I took it out, the steam curled the paper. A second page slid loose, one I had not seen. Fewer lines than a prayer, do not bring your wand. If you must go, come empty-handed. When he offers his, take it and count his pulse. If it quickens at Ariana's name, he may yet change. If not, he loves only the world he imagines. I did not sleep. Before light, I walked to the churchyard and stood. I spoke Ariana's name to the wind and counted my own pulse. I tried to picture myself refusing him. The image held for 3 breaths and broke on the 4th. On the way home, the square clock chimed 13 again. A cat watched me from a wall as if keeping score. When I reached my desk, the second page had gone, as though the future were reclaiming its steps. Only the first letter remained, a borrowed burden. The week inched forward, each hour heavy as stone. I kept the letter folded close, as though parchment could guard against prophecy. The house knew my secret, its walls creaked at odd intervals, reminding me that a future Albus had left a warning here, like a splinter under skin. Gellert arrived often. He carried with him the scent of smoke and rain, the clatter of boots that never hesitated, the conviction that the world was clay in his hands. His words filled the rooms, pressing against the silence until Ariana's absence felt sharper, like a wound reopening. He leaned across the table one evening, eyes bright. The eclipse is near. The vow will bind us, Albus. 2 minds, 1 destiny. Imagine the centuries they'll whisper our names. I poured tea to mask the tremor in my hand. You speak as though destiny waits like a stage. It does. Only cowards refuse the spotlight. He smirked. But you are no coward. I studied the scar on his wrist, the one the letter had told me to watch. It gleamed pale in the firelight. I forced myself to ask, do you ever think of Ariana? His jaw tightened, only for a heartbeat. Then he smiled, too quickly. Of course. She was a tragedy that proves why we must build a new order. No child should die because the world is blind. The letter had instructed, count his pulse at her name. My gaze caught the vein at his throat. It did not leap. My own pulse thundered loud enough to shame me. When he left, I retrieved the letter again. I hoped for another page, another fragment of guidance. None appeared. The ink remained fixed, merciless in its brevity. That night I dreamt of Ariana calling my name from the ridge. She held a wand but no face. When I reached for her, her hand became Gellert's, and the sky broke into shadow. Morning cracked pale. The square clock chimed 13 again, mocking me with its impossible time. I dressed, fastened my cloak, and walked to the ridge before dawn. The grass was cold, stiff with frost. The view spread wide, village roofs below, the churchyard crouched in shadow, the horizon whispering its secrets. I tried to imagine refusing him. My mouth shaped the word no, but my chest rebelled. The thought of his smile turning to ice, of his voice retreating into absence, felt worse than the fate described in ink. Love is not reasonable. The letter knew it. So did I. Back at the house, I found another envelope. It lay on my desk as though it had always belonged there. I broke the seal. The words were fewer still: if you go to the edge of yourself. If you stay, the world bleeds without you. Remember that both choices are love, and both are ruin. I closed my eyes. The letters did not guide, they cornered. Gellert's invitation weighed heavy in my pocket. The eclipse loomed. The world tilted toward a night I already feared, yet could not turn away from. That evening, Gellert returned, cloak dusted with frost. He held out his hand, casual, dangerous. Come with me, Albus. The world is waiting. The ridge awaited us. So did the eclipse. So did the vow. And the letter waited, silent, beneath my desk. The day of the eclipse arrived in a hush. I moved through the house touching familiar things: the banister Ariana once slid her palm along, the frame of mother's mirror, the small dish of screws and phoenix feathers, an inventory against doubt. The letter lay beneath desk, weightless and immovable as a law. Gellert did not knock. He entered as night enters, by degrees, inevitable once it begins. He removed his gloves with a ritual calm and set them on the desk. Albus, he said softly. Walk with me. I studied his face for tremor, for the crack the letters promised. I saw only certainty. We left by the back garden. Frost bowed the grasses. At the gate he took my hand in a manner that belonged to no manifesto. The world's arguments shrank to the size of his pulse against my skin. Your wand, he said. Leave it, if you trust me. The letter's second page, that vanishing counsel, whispered, come empty-handed. I slid my wand between two stones and called obedience strength. Gellert smiled, pleased without gloating, and I hated him for earning that pride, and loved him for wanting it from me. We climbed the ridge. The village lay below like a refolded map. The moon waited at the lip of its own undoing. Here, Gellert said. He drew a circle with his boot and stood me within it. No ministry? No church? No law but ours. What oath do you ask? My voice was steady, my thoughts were not. He took my hands in both of his. Swear you will not step aside again. Swear you will build a new order with me. Swear that when the world moans beneath the weight of the old, you will lift with me rather than pity it. And love? I asked. He smiled, beautiful. Love is the mortar, Albus. It is what makes walls hold. The sky dimmed, a great eyelid lowering. He spoke the old words that make vows cling like ivy. My name sounded different wrapped in them. I thought of Ariana. I spoke her name like a ward. Gellert's pulse did not stumble. It was mine that faltered, and I knew then the letters had not come to absolve me, only to make cowardice impossible. Repeat, he said. I opened my mouth, and a wind shouldered up the ridge. The candle of the moon narrowed to a sickle. Gellert, I said. If I swear, what becomes of those who cannot swear with us? They become the past. He kissed my knuckles to distract my conscience. Do not flinch now, Albus. I wished for my wand, for the letter to bloom a third page, for a world in which love and mercy did not argue across my ribs. The shadow reached totality. The circle felt like a ring. He lifted his hands to crown me with my own assent. Wait, I said, the smallest spell, that can still change a life. Name one thing you would spare that does not serve you. He laughed, not cruelly, but with the ease of a man who believes he is past tests. You, of course. It was the wrong answer, and the right one to know. I did not step out of the circle. I did not repeat the vow. I let the silence grow until it was a third presence between us. Then you refuse? He asked. I will not swear tonight, I said, and felt the ridge tilt. His hands let mine go. Warmth fled. The moon began to brighten at the edges like an apology. Gellert inclined his head, courtly as a king acknowledging a foe. Very well. We will build it without vows. He stepped back. But we will build it. He left me standing in a ring I had not chosen, beneath a sky forgetting the dark. When I retrieved my wand from the stones, it felt heavier, as if wood could learn grief. I went home to a house that had been listening. The letter waited where I left it. When I unfolded it, a new line had appeared at the bottom, ink still wet, you did not swear. The war will come anyway. I pressed my thumb to the sentence until the print of me smudged the print of me. The future had not changed, only I had. And that, the letter implied, must be enough to face what was already walking toward us. Winter came early the year after the eclipse, or perhaps I only noticed its teeth because Gellert stopped wearing gloves. His hands were bare, as if vows could be taken skin to skin without speech. He spoke less like a lover and more like a minister of some new church. Where once he scattered sparks for sport, now he placed embers where they would take. A boy from the next parish vanished and reappeared with a mark that was not a bruise. Shop windows in Godric's Hollow woke to ash traced like handwriting, change or be changed. Owls flew at odd hours bearing invitations sealed in a sigil no ministry registry recognized. The village learned to look away. So did the newspapers. I taught by day and drafted restraint into theory by night, building equations to keep my heart from falling into old shapes. The letter lay beside my inkstone, ordinary as a bill and heavier than a wand. Some evenings I read it aloud to an empty room, only to hear my voice answer back with age I had not yet earned. One midnight, a new envelope shivered into being on the desk with a sound like a candle giving up. I knew the seal before I saw it, my careful wax, my patient pressure. The page inside had not traveled far to find me, I had only not reached the day I wrote it. Albus, it began, spare yourself the theatre, we duel. Not tonight, not next month, but soon enough that your bones will still remember this chair. Think of this not as fate, but as the sum of your avoidances. Our differences are no longer philosophical. They are arithmetic, bodies and fear. I read on. The hand was steadier than the first letters, the confessions unsentimental as winter light. I loved him. There is no grammar to soften it. I loved him beyond good taste, beyond good sense, beyond the point at which love and admiration trade names. If you seek absolution in disgust, you will not find it. Seek it in action. The letter named 3 towns where a whisper had turned into a faction. It named a train schedule and a warehouse and a charm Gellert favored for breaking locks that remembered their makers. It named, with terrible care, 2 students of mine who had attended a meeting and come back speaking as if the world were a door that owed them a hinge. At the margin, you cannot save them by being magnificent. You can only save them by being present. I folded the page and stood. The decision I had postponed since boyhood gathered itself like a cloak over my shoulders. No vows, then. Work. not the work of theories, but the work of interruption. I went to Bathilda's and asked to use her flue. I wrote 3 letters to friends who would soon be called auras whether they wished to be or not. I burned a 4th letter I had begun to Gellert. Before dawn, I walked to Ariana's grave and pressed my palm to the stone until my skin learned its chill. I will not let him write my courage, I said, and the words left a taste like iron. When I lifted my hand, frost had printed the shape of it, a brief flag of intent. On the way home, a sheet of newsprint smacked my boot, skittered, and snagged at the gate. Change or be changed, the ash script said across a photograph of a city I knew better than to ignore. The ridge kept its silence. I understood. I was done with rings in the dirt. At my desk, the letter waited for the part I had not yet read. The last paragraph was shorter than a blessing. If you can still choose mercy as a craft, not as a posture. Choose it with your wand out. And when the day arrives, take his wand if you can. If you cannot, break his aim. You will dream of other endings all your life. Live long enough to keep dreaming. I placed the letter beside my wand and, for the first time, did not hide either. The house listened. The clock in the square struck 13, and for once I was grateful for a time that did not exist. It was proof that even clocks could refuse consensus. I began to prepare, which is to say, I began to love him in a way the world might survive. Spring arrived like a rumor no one trusted. I taught, I wrote, I walked corridors with the patience of a man carrying water across a trembling floor. Resistance, when honest, looks like errands. I returned books students might have burned. I redirected owls. I stood in doorways at the right time and pretended coincidence. 2 boys I liked for irreverence slipped toward a basement meeting where a borrowed sigil glowed on a crate. I intercepted them with detention and a story about a hex that fixes laughter. They rolled their eyes, swore they were only curious, and went back to being boys. That night the warehouse burned. No deaths. The headline credited wind. A girl with elegant penmanship left parchment on my desk, change or be changed, not in ash but in sugar, which is more obedient to fire. I kept it and gave her a book on languages that do not lie. She returned it annotated, Professor, I think I prefer truth that stings. Word of me reached him. Gellert listened for my footfall even when he pretended to walk ahead. He sent no letter, he sent himself. He found me in Bathilda's garden, where crocuses had decided to be brave. Albus, he said, with the softness he used when he wanted me to forget the arithmetic. Come away for a day. There is a river north of here that remembers ice in summer. We are rivers that remember fire in winter, I said, and his eyes brightened. He took my sleeve. You have made yourself smaller to fit corridors and curfews. Walk where the sky has room for you. It is room I am trying to make, I said. For people who cannot afford your sky. He sighed. You are determined to be kind in a world that punishes it. Then help me dull the punishment, I said. He stepped closer, close enough that stepping back would have been retreat from more than politics. Come at dusk. 1 hour. I want to show you something that belongs to us. It is a trap, I said. It is an invitation, he answered, and smiled in a way that used to make me forgive future crimes. I went. Resistance is not abstinence, it is appetite on a leash. Dusk found us by the river he had promised. The water spoke softly against stones. He set a blanket on the bank as though we had earned peace. What is this? I asked. A kindness, he said. You once told me love is not a resource that depletes. I intend to prove you right. We spoke of nothing useful for an hour, which is to say we spoke of everything. His laugh was unguarded. When he kissed me, the river minded its own affairs. Then he ruined it by telling the truth. I cannot let you be the man who stops me, he said against my mouth. I need you to be the man who understands me. I understand too well, I said. He stood. There will be a demonstration in Prague. I have asked them to be careful. I want you to know that. Careful, in his lexicon, meant aiming the fire above heads. Cancel it, I said. Watch it, he replied. If it frightens you, tell me why. We parted in civility. When I returned home, a new envelope waited upright like a witness. I broke the seal. The hand was mine. During the duel, break his aim by breaking his faith in invulnerability. He believes himself unique in kindness withheld. Give him a mercy he cannot accept. Beneath, smaller, do not try to save him by speaking his language. Change the grammar. I slept poorly. In the morning I wrote to an aura I trusted, delay Prague. They will not. I prepared counter-charms that do not bloom into spectacle. I practiced ending spells gently, as if lowering a child into sleep. The demonstration burned hotter than promised. I arrived late enough to count fewer bodies than I feared and more than I could forgive. Gellert found me in the crowd. Terrible, he said. Effective. Cruel, I said. Necessary? I looked at him and saw the boy on the ridge and the man in the fire share one face. You could have been a healer, I said. He said nothing more. I went home and began to practice mercy as a weapon. Mercy is slow magic. It refuses tactical. It chooses the smaller spell that works and leaves no scar to polish later. I began to practice it, shields cast from the side so panic would not see them coming, disarms that let a wand land with dignity, memory stills that paused a mob long enough to remember they were neighbors. Word of this reached students who had drifted toward Gellert's circles. They were not villains, they were bored, bruised by a world that paid their finesse in fear. I watched for them where cafes pretend to be libraries. I argued in tones that never rose. I told one boy that grandeur is often a costume stitched by grief. He came back with questions. A former student, Magda, sharp as flint, fell fastest. Her letters home grew mechanical. Her essays began to praise necessity as if it were a virtue instead of a condition. I found her at a meeting in a cellar lit by candles that guttered like bodies flinching. I said her name as if it were a small bridge we could still cross. Professor, she said, defensive and hopeful. You came to argue again. I came to escort you outside, I said, so you might breathe before you decide. She laughed. Decide what? Whether to make your hands strangers to you, I said. A man with a borrowed sigil on his cuff reached for her elbow. I moved his hand and handed it back to him. Mercy, practiced, looks like grace to witnesses. He studied me and yielded. We walked into air that did not hiss. Magda cried once, as if testing whether the sound still belonged to her. He makes the future feel like a solved proof, she said. That is the easiest lie to love, I answered. Solutions that require fewer people. I took her to Bathilda's. We drank broth. By dawn she wrote an apology to her mother and an answer to herself. Redemption, I kept learning, is logistics. Gellert answered with tenderness, his most precise instrument. He invited me to a room with windows on 3 sides and a plate of apricots cut into moons. "I have missed you," he said. "You missed an audience," I said. He tipped his head. "Both? Come with me to Vienna. Stand beside me while I speak of order, and we will spare dozens and prevent thousands from fury." "Speak, then," I said. "But say the cost out loud." He smiled. "You have chosen to be a surgeon when you could have been an architect." "I am trying to be a janitor," I said. "Someone must clean the blood before morning." He turned my teacup like a compass. "You are trying to save me," he said. "You will fail?" "I am trying to fail beautifully," I said. That night an envelope waited, balanced on my desk. The wax wore the imprint of my ring. Inside, a map of a hillside I knew from childhood, annotated with arrows. A date. A time. The duel had become an appointment. There was more. One instruction, impossible and plain: do not hold the Elder Wand when you defeat him. I read the line until it scalded. Refusing power was a grammar I could almost speak but rarely practice. The letter added, smaller: break his aim by giving him what he cannot name, a future in which his defeat is not an erasure. I packed. I wrote to Magda, stay where the windows can see you. I sent a note to the boy who had returned with questions, keep asking them. I set water for tea, and left it to cool. I had trained for spectacle once, now I rehearsed restraint. In the mirror I practiced, saying no as if it were a charm, soft and sure. I mapped the hillside, marking windbreaks loose scree, and the line where granite met turf. I prepared 3 ways to end a spell without shattering the caster: a twist, a slackening, a gift of balance returned. And I set aside my pride, that oldest wand, reminding myself that victory measured in survivors is still victory. When I reached the hillside, the air had that thin, expectant taste it gets before storms. Gellert stood with his back to me. He turned and smiled, and for a moment I was the man on the ridge again. "Albus," he said. "At last?" "I warned you I was slow," I said. He lifted his wand. I did not lift mine. "Mercy," I said, and the night held its breath to watch what that word could do. The hillside was a page, our footfalls wrote the first lines. Gellert drew an arc through the air and the grass bent as if a wind agreed. I answered with a ward that turned aside without shoving back. His eyebrow lifted. "Will you not raise your wand?" he asked. "I have raised my terms," I said. "They include you going home alive." He smiled. "Then we are adversaries who share a mercy." He tested me with brilliance that glittered like broken ice, a scatter of stunners, a lash meant to wound pride, a charm that makes a man think his lungs have forgotten their trade. I stepped, softened, dissolved. I let his spells spend themselves against structures that did not humiliate. He frowned, not at failure, but at the lack of spectacle. "You rob me of theater," he said. "I will not make you beautiful while you hurt people," I said. He changed languages. The hillside flared with old magic that prefers stone. I quieted it by reminding it of its maker. He watched with that avid look he wore when learning turned intimate. "Still the best of us," he said, and attacked harder. I refused to answer in kind. I turned aside fire with rain. When a curse aimed to break, I made it bend. He grew impatient. "Fight me," he hissed. "I am," I said. The future letter had instructed, break his aim by breaking his faith in invulnerability. Mercy is a mirror. I held it steady. He saw a man who would not be elevated by his ruin. It unsettled him. He advanced, and I let the distance close, the better to speak in a register violence seldom understands. Gellert, I said, low. You have mistaken conquest for cure. And you have mistaken sentiment for ethics, he said, and drove a spear of light at my heart. I stepped left. The spear cut the coat and burned the letter in my pocket to warmth. The ash of future advice perfumed the air. He laughed, exhilarated. The elder one sang in his grip, old wood joyful at competence. I felt its intent like a storm feels lightning roots. The letter's impossible instruction told, do not hold the elder wand when you defeat him. So I lowered mine. Arrogant, he said. Exact, I said. He sent a net meant to cinch to bone. I let it land around me and slackened it with a charm I prefer for tangled yarn. Let me show you what the world could be, he said, and crafted a vision, cities clean as equations, history arranged like teeth. He offered me a place beside him in that porcelain future. I decline, I said. Porcelain breaks. He struck with speed then, a cascade of cuts, each precise as a surgeon with no oath. I bled in two places and bound both with heat that did not scar. I reached him with one spell only, a gentling that eased a cramp in his hand he had learned to ignore. What are you doing? He whispered. Changing the grammar, I said. He hesitated, and in that breath the duel's axis shifted. He had expected victory or martyrdom. He had not rehearsed being defeated without being erased. I stepped close enough to count the winter flecks in his eyes. Yield, I said. Live. There is work only you can do that is not conquest. He lifted his wand again, but it wavered like a thought refusing a sentence. You will be limited, I said. So will I. That is civilization. He struck, not at my body, but at the idea that I would spare him. I answered with a disarm that did not seize. His wand leapt, arced, and came down in the grass between us rather than in my hand. He stared at it as if it were a verdict he had not considered. The hillside held its breath. I did not pick up the elder wand. I let the world see it ungathered. He sank to his knees, not in prayer, but as if the sentence he had written for the world had returned with edits. The wind moved through the grass, making a sound like pages turning. He looked up, furious and young, and whispered, I hate you for this. I know, I said. Live with it. I did not smile. I measured, and let the night instruct me. Mercy did not mean softness, it meant choosing the hinge that turned without splintering the door. I let him see the door intact. He hated that. The elder one thrummed in the grass like a hound called from the hunt. I did not touch it. I thought of Ariana, and of the letter browned by heat in my pocket, and I held still until stillness became an argument he could hear. Power uncollected is a sentence. Silence claimed the hillside after Gellert's surrender. Not a final silence, the kind that ends, but the uneasy quiet of a breath held too long. The elder wand lay in the grass like temptation given a body. I stepped around it, not touching, not even glancing long. To look too long was to consider. To consider was to fall. Pick it up, Gellert rasped. His voice cracked, neither command nor plea, but something jagged between. It belongs to the victor. No, I said, steady. It belongs to itself. Let it. He laughed once, bitter. You think mercy is mastery. You think refusal makes you holy. It only makes you weak. Then weakness will have to be enough, I said. I summoned bindings gentle but firm. They folded around him like threads of twilight, not chains, not manacles. He let them settle, a king rehearsing imprisonment. You have not won, Albus, he said, calm returning to his tone. You have only delayed me. Delay is sometimes survival, I answered. And survival allows the world to keep choosing. We walked down the hillside together, I with steps weighted by grief, he with steps that mocked captivity. Villagers whispered later of the duel, some adding flame and thunder, others weeping as if their fields had burned. The truth was smaller, 2 men, 1 wand left untouched, 1 choice made quietly. Nurmengord was razed not long after. I made it as stern as iron but not cruel. Its stones stood clean, its light sufficient, its guards instructed in dignity. Punishment I could not avoid, but degradation I would not design. If mercy could not be gift, let it at least be structure. Years passed. His name became a story children heard to learn the difference between brilliance and danger. Mine became a legend I wore like a coat that never quite fit. Students looked at me with awe I could not accept. They did not know how many nights I reread those letters, tracing each loop of my own hand as if scripture written by a sinner. Then, one winter deep in my later years, I returned to Nurmengord. The guards announced me, he laughed when he heard. He waited in a high chamber with windows cut like wounds in stone. He was thinner, but his eyes still sparked. Albus, he said. At last again. You expected me. I expected myself, he said. You always arrive eventually. We sat across a small table. His hair had silvered, but his voice remained a blade wrapped in silk. Do you still dream of what might have been? He asked. I dream of what should not have been, I said. And of what was? He studied me, then leaned back. You loved me? Admit it. I loved you, I said. The words had aged like wine uncorked too late, sharp, heavy, undeniable. And I love you still, but not the you who stands for conquest. He smiled, a relic of youth. Then we are both prisoners. I did not answer. I set an envelope on the table, thick with decades of wear. His fingers brushed it. From tomorrow? He guessed. From a tomorrow that has already forgotten us, I said. He did not open it. He only held it, as if weight alone told him what he had lost. His eyes watered, he blinked it away. You have always written the cruelest love letters. No, I said, rising. Only the truest. I left him with stone, with light, with the possibility of mercy even in walls. The elder wand was no longer mine to refuse, it had gone where it wished. The duel was history. The letters were memory. But his face in that cell was proof that love can be both curse and cure, often in the same breath. I walked into the snow outside Nurmengord. The world was cold, the sky pale. Somewhere beyond the years I still owed, a younger Albus bent over a desk, breaking a seal on a letter that smelled of mint and smoke. I whispered into the air as if it could travel backward, forgive me for loving him, and forgive yourself for loving him more. The wind carried it, maybe. Or maybe it only carried the silence I had chosen instead of spectacle. The night I chose to become a letter, winter pressed its ear to the panes. On the desk lay parchment and a seal. I taught that power is a preposition, what you do with, for, to. Tonight I would write to myself and hope a small word could bend a life. I began without date or flourish, because mercy speaks plain. Albus, do not trust Gellert on the night of the eclipse. The sentence looked too thin to hold years. I added proof a stranger could not fake, the burn on my left thumb from a heating charm at 17, the lilacs Ariana loved, the 3 floorboards that never learned discretion. Ink dries truer when read by a boy who still wants the world simple as light. Between lines I breathed. Memory is a stern editor. I did not write about the river, or the night we mistook tenderness for treaty, or Nurmengord's windows. I wrote only what might change a hinge without splintering the door. The sending spell was old as regret, a ring of salt, 3 drops of wax, a whisper that calls tomorrow through a keyhole. I chalked the circle and stood outside it, the way one stands outside grief to keep from drowning. I set the parchment within, the seal unpressed, as though the envelope needed to learn its fate before consenting. You are absurd, I told myself. And you are late. The clock in the square answered with its stubborn 13. Even now the world allowed 1 extra chime for fools and faithful. I pressed the seal, and with it the confession I never spoke aloud, forgive me for loving him, and forgive yourself for loving him more. Wax cooled. Smoke curled, mint sweet, the scent of my life reduced to air. Before the spell could take, I allowed 1 extravagance. I wrote a 2nd page and hid it behind the first. Do not bring your wand. If you must go, count his pulse at Ariana's name. Decide what you learn, and be brave enough to obey it. The page would vanish after its errand. I could not give my younger self too many maps, he would only choose the prettiest road. The circle shivered. The envelope lifted as if remembering how to be a bird. The room dimmed, a polite eclipse, and the letter slid forward into the thin place between clocks. For a moment I thought I heard my own breath from a distance, surprised and angry and relieved at once. Then the air mended. I poured tea. Habit blesses the moments after you do something unforgivable or holy. On the desk remained a loneliness shaped like paper. I held it and waited for the knowledge that nothing I had done altered the duel, the prison, the grief. It had only altered me. A knock came. No one waited. I opened Ariana's door and stood in the memory of sunlight. Little sister, I said, I have learned to be timely about courage. The room said nothing, that is how love answers when it trusts you. Years from tonight, he will laugh when a guard announces me. A phoenix will teach me that endings molt into beginnings. Children will speak my titles and mean a stranger. None of that belongs on the page I sent. A letter is not a life, it is the hinge of one. I cleaned the chalk, swept the salt, and set my wand in the drawer. I left the window unlatched for a different visitor, the thought that tomorrow, even when it argues, is an ally. Somewhere, a younger Albus lifted a seal I had only just pressed. Somewhere, he inhaled mint and smoke and decided whether to be the man he wanted to be before wanting someone else more. Go on, I told him, though he could not hear. Refuse what must be refused. Love what can be loved without a body count. Make mercy a craft. When the time comes, do not pick up the elder wand. The lamp steadied. I set my palm on the desk as if calming a startled bird. Outside, winter leaned closer, curious. I leaned back, equally curious, about how small acts, salt, wax, a single sentence, can escort a world across a narrow bridge. I blew out the lamp. The house exhaled. Tomorrow, always listening, answered. So.